Good evening, everyone. How is that for some great intro and theme music? So, welcome to all of you for joining us tonight. I am Cathy Russ. I am the president of the Book and Author Society. And for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, here's a little background on the Book and Author Society. We're a nonprofit organization based in Metro Detroit, and we host virtual and in-person programs that feature interviews with your favorite authors, like we are tonight. We partner with local independent bookstores to promote our authors' books, and we offer grants to public libraries and literacy-based organizations to support them in their missions. So, by supporting the Book and Author Society, you show your support for your favorite author, your independent bookstores, and libraries all in one fell swoop, as they say. So our bookstore partner this evening is Schuler Books. A link to their website is in the chat, and they are very kindly donating 20% of all the sales from tonight's event to the Book and Author Society so we can do our fall grant program, and we thank them so much for their support. Our special guest this evening is New York Times bestselling author Deanna Raybourn, author of the Lady Julia Gray series, the Veronica Speedwell series, and my very favorite book of 2022, and actually like top 10 of all time, which you can't see because I'm not doing it right. Oh, well, you know what it is, everybody, because that's why you're here. Killers of a Certain Age. Welcome, Deanna.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, so exciting to have you here. And we're gonna talk in just a minute, but I want to do a little bit of housekeeping details. Audience, I'm sure you have a lot of questions for Deanna, and we want to make sure that they are asked. So at any time during the program, type your questions into the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen. And Deanna and I are going to talk for about a half an hour, and then we will start taking your questions. So as things occur to you, don't hesitate to type them in, and we will make sure that you get to ask your questions. So Deanna, hi.
Hi.
I'm so excited that that I get to interview you because I have recommended this book to everybody. It was my very favorite book, and I think it's in one of my top 10 list of favorite books of all time. And just to be able to talk to you about it is amazing. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Tonight.
That's so lovely. Just, when I've spent all day working on revisions for my next Veronica Speedwell book today and tearing the book apart and thinking that I'm, completely flawed and horrible at this job, it's so nice to log on and get all the little kudos.
Well, you have an audience full of readers and writers and people who really enjoyed this book, and I think some people who are new to it too. So I definitely want to talk about Killers, but I don't want to give any spoilers unless you do.
Absolutely. No. I prefer spoiler-free conversations because I figure there's always somebody fresh in the mix. So we'll dance around them.
All right. So Killers of a Certain Age was released in September of 2022, and A Sinister Revenge, which is the 8th book in the Veronica Speedwell series, was just released last week. So you've got a lot going on. How are things?
I'm tired, Cathy.
What's new?
Yeah, and I'm writing Veronica 9. So I turned that in. I turned that one in the week before Sinister came out. And last week, literally woke up and emailed my editor and said, I've got to tear that book apart. I need to change it. I don't like who the killer, I'm changing everything, who the killer is, why they're killing. So I'm not making things very easy on myself right now, but luckily I love this job, right?
Well, we love that you love this job because we love your books. So if I'd like to talk about Killers first. So I want to talk about Veronica, I want to talk about all the books, but Killers. So again, no spoilers. So audience, just so you know, but I want to hear from you in your own words, Deanna, what's this book about?
Well, the short and sweet elevator pitch is that it's about 4 female assassins who are on the cusp of retirement. They're 60 years old, and it's what happens when they figure out that the organization they work for would rather see them dead than cut them retirement checks. And so it's about the way that these 4 women who've known each other since they were recruited at the age of 20, how they come together at the age of 60 to figure out how to take this organization down.
And, the question that I'm sure you've been asked a zillion times, but I know that everybody wants to know, how in the world did you come up with this idea?
Oh, it actually started when my publisher came to me and said they were having a chat in the office one day about the fact that there just are not enough books about older women doing kick-ass things. And they said, your name came up. We feel like you're the natural choice to write something like that. Would you be interested? And I said, well, let me have a little think about it. And I went off and I had a little think, and I came back a week later and I said, yeah, I'd love to. I said, I want to do, usually my series characters, I'm writing about one person and they're always historical. And I said, I'd like to do a quartet of women. I want to do 4 this time. And I want them to be assassins. And they said, oh, this is fantastic. We love it. I said, I want them to be 60 years old. Oh, that's fantastic. We love it. I said, and I want to write a contemporary. And that was the record scratch moment where they were like, what? Because, publishers tend to be very, very risk averse. And when you do something and you are successful at it, they want you to keep doing it. And my historical series have done well. And, all the love in the world to Berkeley and to Penguin for trusting me to do a contemporary book, because that was a huge, huge gesture of faith on their part.
So when they first came to you and said, we have you in mind for this, they had been thinking kick-ass women in their 60s in Victorian times?
They literally, the brief was kick-ass older woman. We don't care anything else. World is your oyster. You can choose whatever you like. Just pitch us something. And so I decided to go as completely out of my comfort zone as I possibly could. And so they didn't even have a specific age range in mind. They just wanted it to be a little bit older than, like, my series character, Veronica Speedwell, I think she's like 27 at this point, or 26. So I've always written, 20 something girls, or Julia Gray, I think, was right at 30 when that series started. So they're always much younger than I am, because I think it's a little bit easier to write younger because you've had that experience.
Right,
so I wrote these, my killers are about 5 years older than I am. So I was writing just, half a generation ahead. But it was close enough that I was able to kind of put myself in their shoes and figure out, how to see the world from their perspective.
Well, I want to talk about those ladies in their 60s, but I think it's called the epigraph, the quote at the beginning of the book, I have wintered into wisdom, from Beowulf.
Yeah. I loved that quote. When I first started writing the book, you always have a working title, and I'm not precious about my titles. I never dig my heels in about them, because I figure the salespeople, the marketing people, the PR people, the editorial people, they all know better than I do, how to package the book and how to present it to the world. So it's very seldom that I will, say, oh, I think a book absolutely has to be titled something in particular. But my working title for this one, I loved. It was Hazy Shade of Winter. Because, of course, it's a Simon and Garfunkel song, but it was also a Bangles cover. I absolutely loved the song, and I was like, oh, it's perfect. Because especially when you break down the lyrics, about the autumn of their life. And I was like, oh, this is perfect. Literally, the first note is, there's no way you're getting that title. There's no way. They said, it's a terrible title. You cannot have it. So I was like, fine, but I'm going to put an epigraph in there with that kind of sums it up a little bit. So.
No, it's great. And then at the end, in the acknowledgments, these to me were like bookends. I'm going to read it. For every person who identifies female and has rage, I feel you, sister. This one's for you. I read that and I was like, yes, like truly a reaction that came out of me, which, a lot of times you read a book and you close it, you go, that was good, or that was nice, or whatever. And I usually read the acknowledgments because it's always interesting to see what people say. But I read that and I was like, yes, so.
It came, I was legitimately, I've spent a fair chunk of the last 6 years angry. There are certain rights that I grew up as a child in the 70s, assuming were just my rights, that they were entrenched, that they would always be there, that these were battles we were never going to have to fight again. And then along about 2016, I started getting mad. I should have been angrier earlier, because things were being poked and prodded, and the thin end of the wedge was slipping in there. But I really got in touch with that middle-aged lady rage about 6 years ago. And this book was a way to kind of exercise some of that and say, you know what, we can protest, and we can complain, and we can write petitions, and oh my God, I've got my legislators on speed dial. And we can do all that stuff, and that's great. But every once in a while, you just want to fantasize about killing people who need killing. And work that out on the page, because none of us are actually going to do it in person. And you know the old adage about no pedicures in prison, and I look terrible in orange, but it's fun to work it out, and according to psychologists, incredibly healthy to work it out on the page and kind of get rid of it there.
Well, it's such a, because it's present day, and, such a departure from the Victorian times and the mysteries that you've been writing. So let's talk about the characters. So we have Billy, we have Mary Alice, we have Helen, we have Natalie. And one of the things that I really appreciated about, because this book was my first exposure to your work.
Well, it's a big departure from the rest of what I write. So
now, yes, yeah, but well, I'm not trying to tell you how you write, but now that I've read a couple of books, I'm like, that humor and the assertiveness of the female characters, that's great.
The books are definitely siblings, but they don't necessarily look a whole lot alike.
Right. But what I appreciated about the four main characters is that I think that they could have been in the hands of a different writer, more like stock characters, like the pretty one and the one, but they're all individuals. They all had their own voice. So how did you write? Because, Veronica Speedwell, Julia Gray, like you said, you're writing one character. How did you do that to make sure that they all had their own voices and identities?
I just kept going back over them over and over and over and over and over. Once I decided on a quartet, I was really fascinated with the idea that, so many times when there's a story about a collection of women together, it's a quartet and they fall into these roles. And for me, it started with, as a kid when I read Little Women. Then you go through Golden Girls and Sex and the City, and like it always seems to be a quartet, and you always do have the one who is, kind of the articulate storyteller of the group, who's maybe fulfilling that main character function, the Joe or the Carrie, or in this case, the Billy. You tend to have the one who's maybe a little more nurturing. You tend to have the brat baby. Every one of these groups has a brat baby. And then you also see these interesting divisions within the quartet of always there'll be two who are a little closer to each other and the other two are a little closer, and how that dynamic breaks down. And so I just thought it was a really fascinating thing to play with. And so I would continually go back to them and say, okay, if I were to think of them as, these kind of trope characters, the narrative, the strong one, the brat baby, what else is there besides that? What do they bring that's positive? What are their failings? What are their, what Achilles heel is this, kind of younger, spoiled, impulsive, what Achilles heel is she going to have? What is that going to mean in terms of what she brings to a mission as an assassin? Is she going to screw things up, or is she going to be an impulsive thinker who's quick on her feet, and that's her gift? So it's I loved playing with the idea that a lot of times your biggest weaknesses can conversely be your strengths, and you can turn what is a weakness into an asset. It doesn't have to be a liability. And I love the way that they play off of each other and with each other, because like I said, they've known each other since they were 20. They've got 40 years of friendship behind them, and nobody can really push your buttons as much as somebody who knew you before you were the adult you are now. And I loved the idea that these 60-year-old women are going to get together, and within a very short period of time, like literally the first 3 sentences, they're scrapping again the way that they did the very first time they met, because some things never change.
and they know each other so well. So they know each other's strengths, they know each other's weaknesses. So, oh, there you go again, doing blah, blah. And the squabbling, maybe that, they're on a mission and a little bickering breaks out,
Exactly. Because, I feel like that would happen, as no matter how well trained you are as a professional assassin, you're human. And if you're a female assassin, you're gonna need a tampon at some point, or your blood sugar is gonna drop, and you're gonna want a donut, and you're gonna take that out on the person next to you. I feel like you're not gonna be superhuman all the time. You're gonna become exactly who you are in your moments of stress when you have those little breaks, when you're not actually killing somebody, when you've got the stresses of the job. How do you cope with that? Well, I feel like the bickering probably lets off some steam for them. It's their little pressure cooker escape hatch, I think.
And then you get to be 60 and you're retiring, and you are, you know your teammates really well, they know you, but everybody's, maybe going through the hot flash thing, but everybody has 40 years of experience. So I think that yourself at that point, and each other, and you know who you are as a team. So don't put Mary Alice in charge of that, because that's not her strength, but Natalie can handle that. So
and I think
machine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, the fact that they have been together for so long, they can shorthand a lot of things. They don't have to necessarily discuss everything or compromise on it. There is a certain value to having a relationship of very long duration that you can just say, girl, let's just shut down to the cob and get this done. And you don't have to kind of pretend, or they have the luxury of no longer having to be polite to each other all the time.
Yeah. What I appreciated too is, you brought in, they're assassins. Yes, they're trying to figure out what's going on, but they're also, they are people, they're humans, and they, they're 60. So there's loss, there's grief. There's some physicality issues. Like, one of the things that I just thought was so great, was Billy, prior to one of the missions, at 60, is doing stretches, and she remarks that she has to do a lot more stretches than she used to.
Life takes its toll. And even like right now, I know at 55 that there are things that ache or creak, or, my knees sound like cellophane when I stand up sometimes, things that did not happen when I was 20 or 25 years old. And I started to think through, okay, if you've had a job that has required a certain amount of physicality and strength and dexterity, what kind of toll does that take on you over the years? And how does that play out? How does it show? And they're in excellent shape, but they're not who they were 40 years ago. And so dealing with those limitations and dealing with those changes, I think is kind of an ongoing challenge for them.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, so after I read this book, because I'm your age, I closed it and I thought, you can be cool when you're 60, Yes,
that was a big part of writing this book is, we have this idea of what 60 looks like, and it's so wrong. On the one hand, like when I was an 80s teen and Golden Girls came out, everybody thought those women were ancient. Well, B. Arthur's character, Dorothy, is our age. Like, she was 55. Like, that's what she was supposed to be portraying. And yet you look at her now and you're thinking, wow, she just seems ancient compared to what it looks like now. And then you look around, all of the women who were these massive, kind of leading lady hot chicks when I was a teenager, Diane Lane, Jamie Lee Curtis, Angela Bassett, they're all turning 60 now.
Yeah.
And you look at Jamie Lee Curtis and tell me that's what you think of when you think of 60. No, but that's what 60 can look like.
Yeah.
For somebody who's obviously taking really good care of herself and has excellent genes and access to, all kinds of coaches and gurus and whatever else she does. But I also feel like Jamie Lee probably likes a donut once in a while,
Yeah. And Jamie Lee likes to have a good time. And that she's
I would go out with her for margaritas. That's who she is. So So I
real
love
as you and me.
yeah. So I loved the idea of kind of playing with expectations of what folks expect when they hear, oh, 60-year-old. I mean, I've heard from readers who are like, I thought they were going to be walkers and wheelchairs. And I was like, no, really not. There are some great books out now that feature characters that are much, much older. The Elderly Lady is Up to No Good books, you know, but you're talking about a character who's 90
Yeah.
and still getting around and killing people, which is awesome. But, you know, she manages to get around without even a walker sometimes. And so I think we really do need to revise what age looks like or what it has to look like, because I think we've got kind of a narrow view of what we expect it to be. And I'm not saying it's never that, but I'm saying it can be more than that.
And that it doesn't have to be that.
Exactly. Exactly.
But the flip side to that is the idea of invisibility. You know, you hit a certain age and you become invisible. And, you know, nobody's paying attention to what these 60-year-old ladies are doing, which enables them to get away with a lot. But that, you know, you hit a certain age and nobody really is checking you out anymore.
No, and it's amazing. And it's so liberating. You know, these are women who were underestimated when they were recruited at 20, going on their first missions, because of the fact that they were young and pretty. But now they're being underestimated for a completely different reason. They're not actually being estimated at all because no one's looking at them. And the idea of that invisibility being a superpower was something that my editor and I talked about a lot, because we both really loved the idea that you could take something that feels like it's crushing to your ego and turn it into something that is such a rock solid, you know, kind of badass foundation to what you're doing. I ran across a story that I shared with my editor about one of the US embassies in Germany during the Cold War. There was an apartment building across the street, and a little old lady would sit on her balcony knitting every day, and everybody just walked by like, hey, she had spy cameras in the planters of her balcony, and she photographed everybody who came and went for like 7 years from this embassy. Nobody had any idea. They're just looking at, oh, that's somebody's Oma up there, and they're just waving to her thinking she's completely harmless. And you know, it occurred to me that that's what we do with women. You know, we sort them into these boxes. You know, she's young and hot and doable, or she's past it and we don't have to think about her at all. And you know, both of those things are usually really wrong, and really, really limited. And I wanted to play with that a lot.
It was so much fun to read, because in addition to the action and the well-rounded characters, I thought there was a lot of humor in this book. And humor is something, I'm picky on my humor, because if not everybody can pull it off. And I laughed out loud in many parts of this book. So I think I mentioned a lot of our audience are writers. So can you talk about, I guess, you know, your writing process, and especially like how do you bring the humor and make sure that it's genuine and not like trying too hard?
I think it's exactly the word you just said, genuine. It has to be an authentic thing. I think we've all had the experience of picking up a book that's been labeled, oh, hilarious. And you read it and you're like, this is so forced. It just doesn't feel real. I think in the first place, you have to set up characters and know what their voices are. And know what the dynamic is that they have with each other. You have to know what they think is funny. And for me, at least, I have to share something of that sense of humor. I write books that have humor in them because I like to have a good time when I write. And I'm not going to be the person who ever sits there and writes a 900-page, you know, super serious fantasy novel, because I can't do that. That's not in my wheelhouse. I'm never going to be the person who writes a super grim, dark thriller. Also not in my wheelhouse. I don't think I would want to be in that headspace for the amount of time it would take to do that. I like to just have a more enjoyable time, especially because a lot of what I write about, when you stop and think about it, is horrible. You know, I mean, I write a lot about murder, or, you know, sometimes it's murder of somebody that occurred 20 years ago and they got stuffed in a wine barrel and their family never knew what happened to them. That's awful. So if you can present it in a way that at least has a little bit of levity and reminds people, hey, this is just a book. You know, be entertained, enjoy yourself, but don't take it so seriously. I had a lot of trouble actually when I first started writing Killers, because I had never written contemporary. I knew my historical voice, like that's there. I know exactly what my historical voice is. I had never had to develop a contemporary voice, and I had no idea what it was. And so I started writing this one scene for the book, and I wrote it and I didn't like it and I threw it out, and I wrote it again and I didn't like it and I threw it out, and I just kept doing this. And I was like on this hamster wheel. And finally it clicked with me that I needed to stop trying to write that scene, and I needed to just tell the scene. Just tell the scene. So I sat down and said, okay, screw it. I'm just going to tell the scene and we'll see what happens. And I wrote it out just as conversational, just as if I were telling it to a person sitting across from me. And I printed it out and handed it to my husband. And I said, okay, I have no objectivity about this anymore. I have no idea if this is good, if it's, excrement. I have no clue. So I handed it to him and he read it and he started laughing and he said, babe, this is your Twitter feed. This is who you are on Twitter. And I went, oh, nailed it. That's my contemporary voice. And so from that point on, I never had an issue with the voice, because I knew what I had to do was tap into who I am and how I speak. And that voice was going to be authentic for these characters. And it just kind of went from there. And so there are, especially when they're bickering or bantering back and forth, they say things that I would say. So, I found it was just easiest if I kept it all grounded in my own authenticity and my own sense of humor, and didn't try to be something I'm not, and didn't try to be a writer that I'm not. I had to know who I was and write that.
Well, and I think that shows, because dialogue is tricky as well. And especially in some historical books, but contemporary too, when authors use dialogue as sort of description, and somebody has the quote starts at the top of the page and ends about halfway through, and it's a description of whatever. And I think nobody talks like that.
Well, isn't that a trick to it, that you've got to go through and try to make the conversation sound organic? And so often you run across it and they'll say, well, Bob, ever since you and I were in college together and we were on the rowing team, and it's like, you don't do that. So I try very hard to avoid those traps. I pay a lot of attention as a reader to what I like and what I enjoy, and I try to bring that into my writing. And if I find something is hanging me up when I'm reading, that's a very good sign to me that I want to pay attention to that when I'm writing and make sure I don't do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When it pulls you out of the story. And
for sure,
it's like editing errors in movies. Like, where'd that come from?
Exactly.
Well, I did want to ask you too, because the plot, it moves back and forth in time. We get a look at our ladies when they're in their 20s, when they're first being recruited, they're training, and then forward, obviously, when they're retiring. How did you keep track of everything so things stayed consistent, and make sure that all the loose ends were tied up, or most of the loose ends were tied up at the end?
Badly. It was horrible. I consulted a couple of friends of mine who are writers, who've done multiple timelines, and asked them, how do you do this? Are there any tricks to it? And the bottom line is no. They both had completely, diametrically opposed processes for dealing with it. So they both said, you just have to do whatever feels natural to you, whatever feels like it's going to work. And I wrote the flashback scenes because it's not technically a dual timeline. It is, right, contemporary with some flashback scenes to the 70s and 80s. And I would write those scenes. Usually what I would do is, if I got to a place where the contemporary, I was stuck just a little bit, I would go write one of the flashback scenes, because that always helped me move it forward. But I was never happy with where those scenes were and how they were working into the narrative. And we got down to, I had 96 hours before the book was due to go into production. The very last that I was allowed to tinker with it, my editor was like, got to be on my desk. And 96 hours out, I woke up and I knew exactly how I needed to fix it. I knew exactly where those scenes needed to go. So I had to basically pull every one of those scenes out from where they were and stitch them back into a different place. I did not, thank God my husband was on a business trip, because I told people I went absolutely feral for that period of time. I sat at my desk and I wrote, I ate something, I fell into bed and slept, and I got back up and I did it all over again. And I did that for that entire period. The dogs would not come near me. They were like, girl, get a shower. This is not pleasant for us. We're not digging it. But I was done. I knew exactly, I mean, and there was no hesitation at that point. It was just, let's get it done, because I knew exactly what I was doing. And now that I look back, I don't know how it escaped me for that long, that those scenes had to go in those places. The only one I was absolutely certain of from the very beginning is the opening scene, which is an action scene. It's a flashback to their very first mission. And I knew that was going to be the opening scene, but the rest of them, I was absolutely clueless until I kind of had that last minute epiphany and went, oh, there it is.
How did your editor deal with that?
She understands what I'm like. And you know, I accidentally terrorize my editors, because I will
accidentally terrorize.
I do. I don't intend to. It's like, you know, it's like with the new Veronica Speedwell book that I just turned in 2 weeks ago, thinking I had this nailed. I knew exactly what I was doing. I turned it in early. I'm feeling all smug. I go off and I go launch Sinister, and then literally woke up one morning last week and went, oh crap. And I had to compose an email to my editor. This is a new editor, by the way. I did not break the Killers editor, but like sometimes I wonder if it's a coincidence that she left the company like right after we were done with Killers. Bless her heart. She was phenomenal throughout the entire process with Killers. But my new editor, I emailed her and said, look, I'm really sorry. This is what I will do. Every once in a while, my subconscious just won't turn loose. And here's what I want to do. This is why it's going to make it better. And within 15 minutes, she wrote back in all caps, love, love, love it. Yes, you're right. It's much better. Go, do you. So thank God. But
well, that's a good editor.
It's a wonderful editor. I don't know why my brain works like this. It's not the easiest road. It's really not. I would like to be more efficient, but I'm not.
You know, you gotta be you, right? Well, I know
Absolutely.
we've got lots of questions coming in, but before we turn to the questions, I do want to talk about Veronica Speedwell. I'm going to see if I can do this right this time. Yay. Here's A Curious Beginning, which is the first Veronica Speedwell book.
It is.
So when you were talking about, you know, horrible things happening but keeping it light, I enjoyed this book so much. And the word that occurred to me when I closed it, and it's not a word I use very often, I thought that was rollicking.
Thank you. I love rollicking. That's a great word.
It's rollicking. I mean,
yes.
it moved. It was fun. Stuff happened. The characters were interesting and fun and, you know, relatable. And I could picture it. I could picture Victorian England. I could picture Queen Victoria. I could picture the docks. I could picture everything there. So it was like visual and descriptive, but it was just a rollicking story.
But see, that's what I wanted, was for it to be fun. And, you know, so often we think historical fiction has to be heavy or it has to be dense. And because a lot of times, a lot of times it is heavy and dense. And, you know, the first author who ever taught me that historical fiction can be fun was Elizabeth Peters. With you know, when I picked up Crocodile on the Sandbank, that was a revelation, because I was like, what? You know, it's Victorian Egyptology and it's fun. How is this possible? And then I went, oh, that absolutely rocked my world as a writer, where I realized what was possible then. It's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but it's so much fun.
Yeah, it comes across. So I wanted to ask you, for readers who maybe only know you from Killers of a Certain Age, like how I was, can you just describe Veronica Speedwell and the series and her adventures, so people know and can pick them up and give them a try?
Sure. Veronica Speedwell, as you showed off, started with A Curious Beginning. She is a Victorian lepidopterist, which is just a fancy word for butterfly hunter. That is her occupation. She travels the world collecting butterflies, and she falls over corpses way more often than a person ought to. And because she's intrepid and she's nosy and she is irrepressible, she always undertakes to find out who done it. And she's got an extremely sexy sidekick who, you know, will they, won't they? Maybe they did, maybe they don't. They do, then they don't. So it's a good time. I have so much fun writing these books.
I have to, I read The Curious Beginnings, so now I'm like, okay, I want to know the answers to those questions.
Well, and Sinister Revenge, the one that just came out, is book 8. So we are rocking along in this series. So if you are new to the series, you've got a binge ahead of you. There are multiple books to enjoy.
And then I did want to bring up one last thing before we go to the questions. What I thought was really cool. You contributed a story to a book called Scribbling Women and the Real Life Romance Heroes Who Love Them. And
Yes.
they're real life stories about how the authors who contributed stories to that book met and are supported by their spouses and real life and life partners.
Mhm.
And your story is called Once in a Blue Moon. So I just thought, what a neat proposition for a book. How did that come about, and if you don't mind telling us your story a little bit?
Oh, I loved contributing to that. There was an event that used to happen the first Monday of every month in New York City called Lady Jane's Salon. And unfortunately, it is no longer in existence. But it was a wonderful experience. They held it at this bar in Soho called Madame X, which looked like a bordello inside. And so it was a romance writers and readers salon. And because my books are not romances, but they always have a romantic element to them, they were lovely enough to invite me to come and read for them a couple of times. And so if I happened to be, once every couple of years, if I was in New York on the first Monday of a month, they would invite me to come and read. And they put together an anthology to benefit an organization in New York City that helps women and children who are in need of housing. And so they asked all of us to donate a short story or an essay about how we met our partners. And so I was delighted to participate. And so I wrote up the story about how I met my husband literally on a blue moon. When we were college sweethearts, and we've been married for 32 years. And he's amazing. And wonderful. And I got to tell that story. And I actually got to read it at Lady Jane's when he was sitting in the audience, which was great. Yeah, it was really sweet. Yeah.
The only thing better would be if you got to do all that on Valentine's Day. Right?
It was February.
Oh, that's great. All right. Well, let's take some questions.
Yes, let's.
All right. So I have our first question is from Alana, and she this is relating to Veronica Speedwell. So she says, will we finally get to know Lady Cordelia better in a future Veronica book? I'm still dying to know all about her mystery lover.
Short answer, yes. Long answer, yes, but not yet. So I have plans for Lady Cordelia in a future book. That is one of those. The beauty of writing a series that goes on for a long time is the puzzle, the mystery, the whodunit is contained within that book. But then you have these wonderful relationships that you can play with over the course of the entire series. You can bring in supporting characters for some books and not others, and the relationships evolve over time. And one of these characters is a supporting character by the name of Lady Cordelia Beauclair. And she has, during kind of an interregnum between two of the books, she has a romantic experience that changes her quite a bit. And we don't know how it came about, and we don't know what the repercussions are going to be. But it's definitely something I'm going to revisit for sure.
Cool.
Just not yet.
Let's see. Laura wants to know, and I think that this is probably based or relating to killers, but maybe not. Are any of the characters in the book based on you or someone you know?
I never base characters on people I know. Never. I don't. To me, that's not fun, because part of the joy of creating a character is kind of just having this carte blanche to this beautiful blank piece of paper in your mind that you can project anything onto. I will say that all of my main characters have some element of me in them. No matter how tiny, there's always something in there. Usually it's part of a sense of humor. In the case of killers, Billy is from Texas. And I am from South Texas. I'm a 6th-generation Texan. And I grew up knowing a lot of women who were just unsinkable. No matter what life threw at them, they were tough, and they would always just pick themselves back up again. And that's a quality that I gave Billy in homage to those women. I borrowed her name from my great aunt, who's no longer with us, but she's not based on my great aunt at all. I just borrowed the name as a tribute to her.
Must be fun too, because you could make your main character or supporting character like your dream best friend or your
Absolutely.
dream boyfriend, or or somebody that you really, really despise. Elements of that person could be the villain, and just work all that out. That must be a lot of fun.
You can. And that's the really fun thing about it too, is writers are magpies. We take all these beautiful little shiny pieces from all these different areas, but the thrill and the challenge is in how you recombine them. So if I were to copy someone who is, somebody I know, either for a nemesis character or for a main character, to me, that takes a lot of the joy out of it, because I didn't have that moment of getting to fit all the pieces together and develop that character and make something original.
So Juliet wants to know, she says, because of timing, I got Killers and the book, there it goes. My chat just scrolled up a little bit. Because of timing, I got Killers and the book Wise Gals by Natalie Holt right afterward. It really gave a lot of depth to the fiction versus the reality of espionage. And so her question is, what, if any, did you use as reference material?
Oh, the funny thing is that just came in on my holds at the library today. I haven't even had a chance to read it yet. Because of the fact there's only so much you can do with espionage reference when you're writing assassins, because they're not going out and gathering information. That's not their job. Their job is to go out in the field, eliminate a target, and get the hell out. There is an entire section of the organization they work for that is devoted to collecting information and processing it to give to these assassins. So that's not something they do. I was able to go in and do a little bit of research on like the women of the SOE during the last part of World War II, because they were phenomenally interesting women. They were doing incredible things. But I also, and I have a character who was serving in those sorts of organizations during World War II, who is a mentor to my killers. So I needed to know her background, but that was World War II information. And so it's not going to play as well in the 1970s when my characters are being recruited and trained. So I had to figure out, how would someone who came from that background then turn around, and what kinds of skills would she impart? And what it came down to is, if you were working behind enemy lines for any of the Allied espionage efforts in World War II, a lot of what you relied on was not technology. It was people-based. It was hand-to-hand skills, because you couldn't risk being caught with certain things on your person. You can't necessarily run around with a revolver. You might need to know how to kill somebody quietly with a kitchen knife. And so those were the kinds of things that I figured my mentor would be imparting to my killers, is how to be the most dangerous woman in the drugstore, because walking down this aisle what you can do with a packet of Tinactin. So that was yeah, exactly. And so and that actually comes into play, because my killers are put into a situation where they don't have access to their equivalent of James Bond's Q. All of their gadgets, all their tech, all of their intel is taken away from them because they're operating off the books. So they have nothing to rely on except their innate skills and their experience and their instinct.
So Tammy's got a question that I think we all want to know the answer to. Is your book being considered for a movie, and any actors that you would like to see play the characters?
All I can say is discussions are happening. People are talking. I always hesitate to answer a casting question about any of my books, simply because I don't want people to think that there's a right answer. Mm-hmm. Just because I might picture someone does not mean that that is who that person is for you. Somebody tweeted at me yesterday about how they thought Angela Bassett would make an amazing Mary Alice. And I'm like, yes, gorgeous, love it. I had a picture of Diane Lane taped to my monitor when I was writing. But that is just where I was in the moment with Billy. There are so many phenomenal people who could play her. And just do an incredible job with the role. And I just, my main takeaway from that is readers need to feel confident that however they picture her, it's right. It's right. It's fine. You do you.
Oh, Crystal's asking, oh, I love this. Do you have, and this is in quotes, angry woman that wants to burn things playlist that came in handy while writing? And she says she does.
There is a Killers of a Certain Age playlist on Apple Music.
Oh,
with that cover. And
right.
While we were waiting during the intro, I put I Am Woman on the playlist. So yeah, it's got both of the versions of Hazy Shade of Winter. It's got American Pie. It's got Killer Queen. It's got a whole bunch of great stuff on it. I love that playlist. So cool. Yeah, go check that out. It's on Apple Music.
Killers of a Certain Age playlist on Apple Music.
Yep.
All right. So let's see. Our next question is from Diane. And she said she found the Veronica Speedwell books the beginning of March and spent a marathon reading books 1 through 7.
Girl.
She says, your vocabulary is exquisite. One of the main joys reading your books. Have you always had an extensive vocabulary growing up?
Yeah, I was one of those annoying little kids who thought that it was fun to read the dictionary. I love making note of interesting words, especially because, there are things that there's always the little tidbits going around on the internet about like the German words or the Welsh words or, Korean words that we don't have a word for that concept in English. So I'm fascinated at the way that we use language. I follow Wordsmith and Haggard Hawks. And so I'm still constantly adding to my own vocabulary because I think that's a joy. I just think it's fun to play with.
And I like what you said too about words that don't translate into English, but like, I'm not going to say it right, but Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude?
Yeah.
Yeah, and in Welsh there's Hiraeth, which is which I know I mispronounced, even though I'm Welsh, I cannot speak the language at all. But that's a longing for something. It's a homesickness when it's not about your home though. It's just this kind of wistful nostalgia, this melancholic feeling that you read that and you go, oh, I know what that is. I know what that is. But I mean, we have a language that has words like vespertine. Like, that's gorgeous. That's amazing.
And that, and when you read it and it describes whatever's going on perfectly. There's such a great feeling when you read a sentence that you just go, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a special joy in writing Victorian characters because you can get away with that a little bit more. Because we feel like their vocabulary might be a little more abstruse. And so you can get away with chalking up a word to them that maybe we wouldn't be using in our everyday vernacular. So I occasionally will drop things into Veronica's mouth that like Billy would never use. Right. So that's a little bit of extra fun.
So Emanuela says this was her first book that she's read of yours. And it's #1 on her reader's advisory list. She says, would you consider changing your writing approach to something like Killers of a Certain Age? And she wishes I wish I read more titles on this subject, is what she says.
I would love to do more contemporary as well. I had so much fun writing this book, and it was the hardest book I've ever written by a mile, but it was also the most fun. So I would love to continue writing Veronica, and I would also love to do some contemporaries because this absolutely broke me wide open as a writer. And showed me what I was capable of, because I would never, the fact that I am technically a thriller writer, I laugh my ass off on a daily basis about that one, because I'm a huge chicken actually when it comes to writing or reading. I only ever I read my first thriller, I think about four years ago, because I'm a chicken. I don't like to read thrillers. They scare me. But I was getting ready to go on a beach vacation, and I always take a stack of books on the beach. They have to be physical books because you
Yep.
need them to, they get sandy, they get sunblock on them. And I was going through and I have to have a book per day for the trip, right? So I always go with a stack. And I was in the bookstore, and I did not mean to buy a thriller, but I saw this book that was faced out, and it had a beautiful young Black woman with great big green sunglasses on. And in the reflection in the glasses, you could see a butcher knife. And the title was My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. So I grabbed it, and I thought, okay, I can read this on the beach, because if I get scared, I can see if anybody's coming, because I'm on a beach. It's not like you're reading it in bed and you're scared, looking over your shoulder. So I very bravely read it on the beach. And, in the way that Elizabeth Peters taught me that historical fiction can be fun, this one taught me that thrillers can actually be fun.
Thrillers can be fun.
Thrillers can be fun. They don't all have to be super grimdark and super scary and super, oh crap, what's under the bed? Is that somebody breathing in the dark? It doesn't have to be like that. It can be a different type of thriller. And that absolutely just opened everything up for me.
So Sandra wants to know, in writing a series, does it get easier or harder?
Aspects of it get easier. You can rely on your main characters, you rely on the world that you've built, and it's very easy to slip back into it because you know who these people are. And the aspect of it that's more difficult is you want to sustain readers' attention and enjoyment. So you're always trying to raise the bar on yourself just a little bit with each one, because whatever caused readers to buy into that series, you don't want to lose. You want to keep that, but you also want to keep it fresh, and you want to surprise them. So it's my business card is actually a Victorian woman in a gorgeous red petticoat on a tightrope, because that's the perfect metaphor for the kind of writing that I do. It's everything is a balancing act.
Well, I imagine too, you want to keep the characters evolving so they're not the same in every book. I mean, they're growing too, or changing, or having different experiences, and so you have to keep up with them.
Absolutely. But at the same time, you have to do it in such a way that it feels authentic and organic, because otherwise readers are going to be like, no.
Yeah.
I know her. She would never do that. And you're like, but she lives in my head. But I mean, they invest, they have part ownership of these characters, because I feel like when I've put the characters on the page and I turn loose of it, my part is done. But the other half of the equation is what the reader brings to it, and what the reader takes out of it, and their interpretation of it. And so that is very valid. If a reader feels like, no, that character absolutely would not do that, then I have not taken them from point A to C. I skipped B somewhere if they're not getting all the way there, and that's on me. So I have to make sure that I'm hitting all those points to make it feel true, because you can make a character do just about anything as long as you show the process and you show the reasoning behind it. You can't just kind of pop up and have these things come out of nowhere, because readers will absolutely nail you to the wall for it, and they should. Because they care. God love them. They care about what you do. And that's the greatest compliment a reader can pay you is actually having an emotional investment in something that you've written.
So Patty wants to know, is it necessary to start with book 1 in the Veronica Speedwell series?
No, they are designed to be read however you like. I hate, as a reader, picking up a book and realizing it was partway through a series and it's got spoilers for previous books. There is one revelation that comes out in A Curious Beginning that carries through the other books and kind of informs them. So if you go back to read Curious Beginning, that part would be spoiled for you, but everything, you can absolutely pick it up partway through the series if you prefer. So because there may be a setting or a theme that appeals to you more than the others. So I'm not going to judge. Read how you like. It's fine.
So this is a question that several people are asking, and is there going to be a sequel to Killers?
All I can tell you is discussions are being had. People are talking. I'm going to give you my cop-out answer, which is I can't say. I can tell you people are talking. I would love for there to be. So that I can absolutely tell you is I would love to see more of these characters. I think they're great fun.
Oh, I think it'd be, I'm no editor, I'm no publisher, but my goodness, a no-brainer. I mean, if you want to do it, to me, you'd be the one that would be, that we'd have to sell. But if you're down with it, so here's a question and a comment from Janina. She says, "Thank you for this book, Killers. I too think that it would make a great movie. I work in a library and have recommended Killers to many older patrons, and each one has raved about it. There are not enough books about older women. Are you considering writing another book about those of us in our 60s and 70s?
At the moment, I don't have anything on my radar. I have even the books that I write, though, that don't center around older characters, usually always have supporting older characters who are doing interesting things and who are intrepid and leading their own fabulous lives. So even if they're not central to it, they're going to be there somewhere. Yeah, I've got a couple of projects in the queue that I have to work on, that I've got to focus on first.
All right. So this is a question from Jennifer, and we're starting to wrap up the Q&A, but if you have any last questions for Deanna, please do put them in the Q&A so we can make sure to ask. But Jennifer wants to know, she says, Killers of a Certain Age is the 2023 chosen title for On the Same Page in Ionia County, one of the community read type programs, recommended by all 7 Ionia County libraries to all their patrons. Do you have any specific themes or questions that you think we should talk about at upcoming book discussions, maybe important to you but not super obvious?
Well, there are readers group questions on my website. So anybody who wants resources, any of my books, if you are discussing them with people, you have a book group, there are ancillary materials on the site. There are already reader's guides for you that you can go and pull questions from. I think, to me, the biggest thing is about how we view aging, especially with women, and how the friendships will sustain over a period of years, how they change, how they don't, and how your liabilities can become your superpowers. It's all stuff that you've already touched on, Cathy, that I think make for really interesting discussions, especially if your group has a lot of women in it.
And I if I can just throw something in there, because this is one of the things that I picked up from the book that I thought is when you're, when by the time you get to 60 or 55, you know who you are and you're comfortable in your identity in maybe a way that you're not when you're 20 and 30.
Oh God, yes. Being comfortable in your own skin. I mean, I know that once I hit my late 40s, man, my give a shit are just broke. Like, it's in pieces out on the curb waiting for the garbage man. Like, I don't care anymore. It is so liberating to kind of be free from that and go, you know what? I am never going to be an Olympic figure skater. I am never going to know how to make a souffle. I am never going to be fluent in 17 languages. I am never going to master quadratic equations. I'm fine with all of it. You become so comfortable letting go, because when you're young, all these possibilities, they crowd you in. They suffocate you sometimes because you got so much to choose from. As you get older, you winnow out what doesn't work for you and you focus on the things that do. You learn what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are, and you get much more comfortable with the idea of being comfortable and saying, you know what, I may be a person who loves the idea of going to concerts, but guess what? The reality is I hate them. I hate them. I don't want to be moshed. I don't want people spilling beer on me. I just want to hear Adele clearly, so you learn who you are and you get comfortable with that. And that is the most liberating thing in the world. There are so many gifts that come with getting older, and I don't think we talk about them nearly enough, because I love being this age. And so many people are like, 25 is the great. No, it wasn't. 25 was not the greatest for you, honey. Just wait. It's so great on this side. It's so great. Like I threw a croning ceremony when my menopause was finished because I was like, I am wearing a flower crown and I am like, this is the greatest ever. I can wear white jeans whenever I want to. I'm so happy with this. And I celebrated every particle of becoming a postmenopausal woman. And we don't even say the word menopause, hardly. And that's ridiculous. So yeah.
Yeah,
That was
it's
quite
just,
a tangent.
no, I'm glad because there is something amazing. Like you know, I know when I turned 50 and I can't remember what happened, but I thought I am 50 years old. I don't have to take this.
Oh my God, isn't that the greatest thing in the world? When like you're in the middle of a situation in public and you go, oh, wait a minute, I can walk away.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't have to put up with that treatment.
yeah.
That's
I've seen you coming because I'm 30 years older than you, and I know exactly what you're trying to do.
oh my God, being able to just sit back and suss stuff. That's why they think we're witches, is because I mean, it's because of the fact that we see it and we recognize the patterns.
Yeah.
And at this age, we're not afraid to call it out.
And it's funny because, you know, I can maybe not know why I'm in the kitchen, but you know, but I do know, you know,
Mhm.
all the other stuff that I need to know, you know.
Exactly.
But I think it's interesting though, paired with that invisibility factor, it can make you a superhero, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So before we go, I do have one more question for you.
Mhm.
Because I know this is a question that our audience always wants to know is what are your favorite books, or what are you recommending these days, or you know, I don't know if you want to share any particular favorite authors that you have, but stuff like that.
Okay, so
Who do you think we should read?
speaking of fun, I love Jessie Q Sutanto. She wrote uh Four Aunties, the Four Aunties. It's a 2-book series so far. I don't know
Oh,
if there's going to be any more in them, but just last week she came out with Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers, and I'm halfway through it. And oh my God, I love her so much because she always incorporates some aspects of like Chinese and Malaysian culture, which I love because I'm not familiar with that. So I get something new, but she does it in such a fun way. But the first one was Dial A for Aunties, and the second one was Four Aunties in a Wedding. That's what it was. And those books together were just so much fun. I remember finishing Dial A for Aunties, and I thought, oh God, all I want is a sequel and a Netflix series. And I went and checked, and it's like the sequel's coming, Netflix, and I was like, yes. So the fact that she started something new with Vera Wong is absolutely hilarious. So I love that book, and it's super fun. I also do in my newsletter every month. I will usually do a couple book recommendations, and I always holler on Twitter when I find something that I'm loving. I always I treated myself to a Lynn Painter romance last week that was loosely related to Mr. Wrong Number. This one was called The Love Wager. And just, you know, it's the perfect, oh, I just want to kick back and relax and enjoy these people. So her books are great fun too.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's fabulous. Well, there's one more comment in the chat that I think is a good wrap up. So Vicky says, and I really want you to hear this. She says, I don't usually read mysteries, but I picked this book up knowing that I would be seeing you today. I'm on chapter 2 and I absolutely love it. You are my new favorite author. You changed my mind about reading the mystery genre. Thank you for this wonderful and entertaining book. So,
oh, thank you. That's a huge compliment because it's you know, it's a risk when you kind of edge. I know what I felt when I picked up that first thriller. I was like, oh Lord. So I'm glad I was able to do that for Vicky. So welcome to Mystery, Vicky.
so, oh my goodness, I could spend another 3 hours, but we're coming to the end of our time. Deanna, thank you so much for being with us. I just so appreciate your time. Love your books, and can't wait to see what you do next. And I hope you'll come back and see us again.
I would love to. Thank you so much, Kathy. This has been so much fun. And thank you guys for tuning in.
So I want to say to all of you, thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for Schuler Books for being our partner bookstore. The link again is in the chat, and just to remind you, if you purchase any of Deanna's books tonight, Schuler will donate 20% of the purchase back to the Book and Author Society, and we're going to use that to give out our grants this fall. So, so if you feeling inclined the way that I am to buy books 2 through 8 of the Veronica Speedwell series. Check out Schuler Books. And just to let you know, stay tuned for news about our April event. We are going to do an in-person event, and we're going to be talking to Rose Hackman, who wrote the upcoming book, Emotional Labor. So stay tuned to our website, social media, the newsletter, and we'll keep you informed. So until we meet again, I wish you all well, happy reading, and thank you very much for supporting the Book and Author Society. Have a good night, everybody.